All right, well, thank everybody for coming here this morning. Much appreciated. I'm quite excited. I'm wearing my love tie for my love of education, which there's a public hearing on today, a budget hearing. But we're here to talk about education funding as well. So my name is Ron Deutsch. I'm the director of New Yorkers for Fiscal Fairness. We are here today with Senator Ryan, Assemblyman Bronson, both chairs of the respective economic development committees in each of their houses. We are also here with Greg Leroy, who is the executive director of Good Jobs First, a national organization that is renowned for tracking subsidy programs throughout the United States. I've been working with them for multiple decades and been quite impressed with the work that they're doing. We're also joined today by groups like Strong Economy for All, the New York State Council of Churches, New York State United Teachers, Reinvent Albany, and Alliance for Quality Education. And really what we're here today is to talk about the fact that industrial development agencies, IDAs, which we hear about a lot, which are local economic development arms, if you will, in localities. And basically, we're here to say that, and here to note that these industrial development agencies provide abatement of county, school, property, sales taxes across the board. We don't think that that's a wise thing to do at the local level. As you may know, New York is spending somewhere in the neighborhood of $4.5 billion a year on many of these local subsidies. And we're here to say enough is enough, quite frankly. These are not productive uses of these dollars. And most importantly, a new groundbreaking study is being released today by Good Jobs First, the first of its kind, that really looks at the impact of these kind of school tax abatements on communities and school districts across New York State. And they've found that New York is losing about $1.8 billion in IDA abatements to school revenue at this point in time. So, and we're fortunate enough to be joined by Senator Ryan and Assemblymember Bronson, who have introduced legislation in each of their houses, S89 and A351 to be exact, that would prohibit this very problem. It would prohibit IDAs from abating school taxes for companies moving into a given area. So without further ado, I'd like to turn it over to Senator Ryan to talk a little bit about the legislation that he's introduced. Thank you.
Thank you, Ron. Thank you, everyone, for being here. As you can hear on the stairs, every year, school budget is a hot topic. We've all seen the stories and heard the cries. We don't have enough money for our schools. School districts are engaged in a constant battle to make sure their funding levels stay high. We've worked hard to put more money into education. We can put that in at a historic amount for the last 3 years. But no matter how much we invest in education and we fill their coffers, there's a hidden problem that's decaying the money that we give. Every year, IDAs across the state, they waive taxes meant to go to school children. Just last month, an IDA in Western New York approved $172,000 worth of tax breaks to 2 fast food restaurants. We don't get much bang for our buck out of subsidizing that type of economic development, but the hidden story is the bulk of that money was supposed to go to school districts. So we traded 20 low-wage jobs for money for our kids. It doesn't take an expert to see that this is wasteful spending, but we've got some expert here who are going to tell you this is wasteful spending. Overwhelming amount of evidence to say this is not the way to do it. As far as any independent analysis is concerned, it's a settled matter. The IDA's subsidies aren't just a waste of money, but they actually hurt our school kids. And it's something that would surprise most New Yorkers, that New York schools are funded mostly by property tax revenue. And so when IDAs take the money away from school districts, they're taking money from our kids. And what does that lead to? It leads to the school districts to have to raise local taxes to fill in that gap. But with the tax cap, they can't raise all the taxes necessary, so they come to the state and say, we need more education funding. But no matter how you slice it, the taxpayers are footing the bill, and it's hurting our children. Assemblymember Bronson and I have introduced this bill that would stop IDAs from compounding the problem. It's a simple bill. Prohibit IDAs from waiving school taxes. School taxes belong to school children. That's all we have to say. Keeping IDAs from pilfering school district, it keeps the school districts strong. And the only people who would object to this are local IDAs. But we know how to support education. We know how to grow business, and we know how to lower tax bills. And we do that by stopping the needless pilfering of school district funds. So it'll prevent major corporations, whether it's Amazon or Moe's Tacos, from taking money from school children. And that's what we need to put the end to it. Thanks everyone for coming today. Super important issue.
Thank you, Senator. Next, I'd like to introduce Assemblyman Harry Bronson.
Thank you, Ron, and a real privilege to be here with all of the groups that are supporting this piece of legislation and with my colleague, Senator Sean Ryan. Education is key to creating an opportunity for our children. We're in the education business because we want to create an ability for our children to fully participate in our communities and our society and to be all they can be. And that's why every year we fight to make sure that we have state funding for our school districts across the state. And the governor this year has joined us and did a really good job of fulfilling the state's obligation with foundation aid. But that's only a part of the equation and making sure that our school districts are fully funded. The other part is through localities and by being able to tax property taxes and other local taxes. In the city of Rochester, 1 and 2 children live in poverty. In the Rochester City School District, student population of roughly 20,000. On any given day, 2,000 of those children are homeless. The density of poverty and the depth of poverty in the city of Rochester creates barriers to education. How do we address those barriers? Is to make sure that the school district has the funding to provide the services, not only educational services, but mental health services, wraparound services for the children and their families so that they are in a place where they're ready and able to learn. With that objective in mind, it's inconsistent to say, as Senator Ryan just said, that we want to take dollars away from those school districts, give it to benefit businesses like a fast food restaurant to locate in our areas. I'll give you an example in Monroe County. A law firm that's downtown wants to move to one of the suburbs. What does Monroe County IDA do? We'll give you tax subsidies. We'll help pay you to move to a suburb, a 15-minute drive from where you are right now. That's on the back of our children. On the backs of our children. We ought not have policies in this state that allows us to take money from our school districts that will help our children and give it to businesses, especially when there's no need, no incentive to give it to them. It's just giving them a tax break. That law firm would have moved to that suburb area whether they had that tax break or not. This bill will put an end to that approach. As was said, enough is enough. I'm all for supporting businesses because they are the entities that employ our families. But I'm not about supporting businesses on the backs of our children. This bill will stop that, and we need to get the bill passed. Thank you.
Thank you, Harry. Good. Well, and now let me introduce someone who I've been working with for a number of decades and who I have tremendous respect for. Good Jobs First has really done some of the most amazing work tracking subsidies and showing the folly of these subsidies and abatements and tax credit programs across the country. So allow me to introduce their executive director, Greg Leroy, to talk about his groundbreaking report.
Thanks very much, Ron. And thanks very much to Senator Ryan and Assemblymember Bronson for coming today and supporting this. In fiscal year 2021, school districts across New York State lost $1.8 billion in tax revenues granted in the name of economic development. That makes New York State by far the biggest loser for education from tax abatements, more than 3 times second place South Carolina. We were able to quantify these losses affecting at least 318 school districts across the state because of a new government accounting rule that, for the first time ever, requires local governments, school districts, cities, and counties to finally report how much revenue they lose to corporate tax abatements. The new rule is called Governmental Accounting Standards Board Statement Number 77 on Tax Abatement Disclosures. It's a rule which we at Good Jobs First and hundreds of others, including 29 groups and individuals from New York State, more than any other state, thank you, New York, we demanded and won from GASB back in 2015. Today we're exercising our data victory. The $1.8 billion in revenue lost is spread among 318 school districts. In all but 5 of those, we got the data directly from the financial reports, the audited financial reports of the school districts. In the big 5 cities here in New York State, New York, Buffalo, Rochester, Syracuse, and Yonkers, school districts do not exist as separate entities and therefore don't file their own financial reports. In those cases, we took the total abatements reported by the cities and apportioned them to the school districts based on the share of the total budget of the city dedicated to public education. The effects are not evenly spread. 7 school districts reported per pupil losses per year of more than $5,000. Oswego, Peekskill, Rensselaer, Chateauguay, Northern Adirondack, Sharon Springs, and Valley Stream number 30. 15 more districts lost between $2,000 and $5,000 per student per year, and 15 more lost between $1,000 and $2,000 per student per year. So altogether, 37 school districts out of 685 suffered abatement losses of more than $1,000 per student per year. The average loss is $541 per pupil per year, and that alone puts New York among the worst 5 that we know of reported losses of any state in the country. But that average masks a wide range. So for example, in West Genesee, where the student body is 85% white, the loss per student per year is $3. But in Peekskill, it's over $5,000, where nearly 9 out of 10 students are of color and 3/4 qualify for free or reduced price lunches. In Hoosick Falls, which again is almost white, the cost is $5 per year per student. But in Uniondale, where almost all the students are of color, the losses are about $2,000 per student per year. These findings are conservative. They are not complete because some unknown share of 362 districts that did not put a note or a coherent note in their financial reports, we know some of them have abatements. So for example, 21 of those 367 reported offsetting payments called pilots, but they didn't report the abatements themselves that are supposed to be offset by those pilots. It's kind of like cost benefits straight out of Alice in Wonderland. That is, first let's have benefits, later maybe we'll have costs. Good Jobs First, we know this story about the IDA failures all too well from the 16 years that we ran our Good Jobs New York project and worked hard to reform the New York City IDA. We know that when governments disinvest public education in the name of economic development, they're actually undermining their business climates. That's why we're so grateful for this legislation from Senator Ryan and Assemblymember Bronson being proposed as a remedy. And that's why we're so grateful to be joined today by so many constituencies that get the connection between great schools and a strong economy. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Greg. We appreciate the work that you've done to analyze IDAs here in New York and your work on analyzing all business subsidies around the country. We know we're in bad shape here in New York when it comes to economic development, and we know we're in desperate need of reform. So we're really glad to be joined by a number of different groups. I mean, unions, faith groups, education, advocacy groups, progressive organizations. Everyone across the board knows that this is a bad idea, continuing this practice. So let me bring up someone from good government who's been working on these issues for a very long time, Elizabeth Marcello from reInvent Albany.
Thank you, Ron, and thanks everyone for being here. reInvent Albany strongly supports the Ryan-Bronson bill. Unfortunately, IDA tax breaks are a triple whammy of terrible tax policy. First of all, we know that business subsidies like this don't work. They simply don't work to grow economies. Second of all, they take funding away. Well, second of all, they're unfair to other taxpayers, right? Why should some people pay taxes while other people get off free? It's just not fair, especially to existing businesses. And finally, as we've been talking about today, they take funding away from public schools. IDA tax breaks are not free money. Economists call them tax expenditures for a reason. It's a form of off-budget spending that takes money away from schools and other basic services. I would also say that IDA tax abatements are not the only big issue facing economic development this legislative session. There are plenty of other destructive programs like the Trump-era Opportunity Zone tax break program, which we need to close once and for all. The governor is simply going down the wrong road on economic development, and we need to freeze all tax abatements and business subsidies. We need common sense, fact-based economic development. Thank you.
All right, tell us how you really feel. All right, so next up, I want to introduce someone who's been fighting for education funding for a very long time, and an organization that's really been at the forefront of fighting for education dollars for our students. So let me bring up Marina Marcoux-O'Malley of Alliance for Quality Education.
Thank you. Hi, everyone. I'm here as the policy director for the Alliance for Quality Education. My name is Marina Marcoux-O'Malley, but I'm also here as a mom of 2 school children and as a property taxpayer here in the Capital Region. School children have been told for my entire career at AQE, 15 years and more, almost 2 decades, that we didn't have enough money to fund our schools. Thankfully this year, because of the fight of our elected officials here and because the governor finally is keeping the promise that was made back then, we are completing that fight. 20 years it took our schools to be fully funded. And this whole time, we've been giving away funding, money that our school children needed to businesses. At some point, our priorities need to reflect what we say they are. Our actions need to reflect what we say our priorities are. And as a state, we need to put an end to these giveaways. Our schools now in 2023 have a lot of difficulties to face. They have a lot of mental health issues. Our school children have a lot of mental health issues, have a lot of other concerns and issues that the pandemic illuminated, and we need to address those. And with federal funding ending, we actually need to do something and put an end at these giveaways to businesses. And now, I thank Senator Ryan and Assemblymember Bronson for putting forward this bill, and I am here to say that our children must come first. That's where our priorities need to be. Thank you.
Thank you, Marina. Let me introduce another individual who's been fighting for economic development reform for a long time and whom I've been working with for a very long time. Mike Kink is the director of the Strong Economy for All Coalition.
Thanks, Ron. And thanks, Senator Ryan and Mr. Bronson. Pretty simple message. Industrial development agencies are out of control. They're stealing from our students, they're stealing from taxpayers, and state lawmakers here at the Capitol have to put an end to it now in this budget that's due April 1st. The way things work around here is that each house of the legislature is going to step up and set their priorities literally in the next 3 or 4 weeks. At the Strong Economy for All Coalition, we urge Speaker Hastie and Leader Stewart Cousins to make sure that the Bronson bill is in the Assembly One-House budget and the Ryan bill is in the Senate One-House budget, and to prioritize elimination of IDA robbery of school kids in this year's budget. You heard Greg Leroy say it. New York is the worst in the nation for these kinds of corporate subsidies that drain local school districts. If Florida and Alabama can have laws that stop this kind of ripoff, then New York sure can too. We're glad to be here today with allies from the faith, labor, and community organizations all across this state that recognize that public education is absolutely the best kind of economic development, and we stand with Senator Ryan and Mr. Bronson to move this bill forward and get it done by April 1st. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Michael. And finally, let me bring up Rashida Tyler, who is with the New York State Council of Churches. Rashida.
Thank you. Let me just say we should not be sacrificing our future, our children's future, for economic expediency in the present. I come from a place, Kingston, New York, with personal experience with pilots and school districts giving away tax dollars for private development. The Kingstonian, a project being built in Kingston, was given over $20 million in a pilot agreement over 25 years that actually does jeopardize children in our region and also the economic development in our region. This was a very contentious issue. Everything was being thrown at private developers and nothing was being thought of for the future of our children, who are actually our seeds that will help develop our region economically in the future and grow. And so I say I support this measure. And I say this as a person who, during the fight over the Kingstonian, actually joined our IDA to help reform it. So I'm on the IDA, and I do support these reforms. Thank you.
Big reveal. All right, well, I want to thank everybody for coming, especially our friends in the press. But I just have to say, you know, after doing this for 3 decades, trying to push reforms around economic development, I'm energized by the fact that the 2 chairs of the economic development committees in both houses are moving forward legislation that will prevent this from happening. It is so long overdue, I can't even begin to tell you. And the fact that we have this solid research now by Good Jobs First, which is a nationally recognized organization on this issue, you know, I think the facts are undeniable, and we're going to be talking about this tomorrow at the Economic Development Budget hearing as well, and we need to really start rethinking how we think about economic development in New York State, because what we have been doing simply does not work. It is not good for school children, for our school systems, for property taxpayers, and it's not, quite frankly, it's not good for other businesses in those communities, given that they have to compete with the folks that are getting these property tax abatements. So be happy to answer any questions that folks might have. Thank you for coming.
We've had the bill before. We just introduced it this year, but now with the study, it's bolstering the data, and the evidence is going to bolster the cause. Well, I can speculate on this, but the reality is we are asking our school districts to provide a quality education. To do that, they need sufficient staff, both at the teacher level as well as paraprofessionals and others. They need to have mental health professionals in the schools, especially now that we have suffered the impacts of COVID. We needed it before COVID, we really need it now. In districts like some of them that I represent in the Rochester City School District, we would love to upscale most of our schools to make them community-based schools to provide wraparound services not only for the child, but also for the child's parents and family. Those are all services that cost a lot of money. And when we talk about the dollars per pupil, every dollar that they are shortened or they don't get because we're giving it to a business is another dollar that can go to direct educational programming as well as the other services that the school districts provide. So $500, I don't know what that translates to necessarily, but certainly $500 could pay for some mental health counselors to be in a school district.
It's also the difference. It's also the difference for a district the size of Albany, for instance, about 10,000 students. It's a difference of about $500,000. $500,000 can get you pre-K transportation, which Albany used to offer years ago, and it doesn't anymore because it can't afford it. It can get you 2 more community schools. It can get you at least 4 or 5 social workers or school psychologists. It can get you literacy coaches. So those are things, those are resources that our schools have and need more of to meet the need of today, especially right after as we're coming out of this pandemic.
Any other questions? Comments? Suggestions? Thank you all for coming. Greatly appreciate it.